It was 2:17 in the morning on a Wednesday in February when my 5-year-old called me on the yellow watch phone I'd set up on her nightstand before my shift, and I knew from the way she was breathing before she got a single word out that something had gone badly wrong. Mommy. Her voice was that particular kind of small, the kind that only happens when a child has been crying alone in the dark for a long time. Auntie Denise says I have to call her Mama now. She says you're not, a hiccup, a wet breath. You're not my real family. I went completely still at the nurse's station. Someone was talking behind me about a patient in Bay 4. I stopped hearing them. Is that true? Avery whispered. Then Scott's voice somewhere in the background, low and flat. Avery, give me the phone. The line went dead. I stood there with my cell pressed against my ear and the silence where my daughter's voice had been. Then I found the charge nurse, told her I had a family emergency, left my lanyard on the desk, and drove the 23 minutes home from the hospital in a way I don't entirely remember. The roads were glazed with black ice, and I drove like I didn't notice, because I didn't. When I got inside, the house was quiet. Avery was in her bed, curled around her stuffed rabbit, asleep. Scott was on the sofa with the television on low. Denise came out of the kitchen holding a mug with both hands, and her expression was the one I'd come to recognize over the preceding months. Patient, slightly tired, the expression of a woman who has decided in advance that she's the reasonable one in every room she walks into. She had a nightmare, Scott said before I could speak. She gets confused when she wakes up from those. She called me and said, "She's 5, Leah." Denise set her mug on the counter. She says a lot of things when she's half asleep. You know how they get. I stood in my own front hallway and looked at both of them and understood, perhaps for the first time completely, that I wasn't going to get the truth from that room that night. So I went and sat on the edge of Avery's bed and held her hand until my own breathing slowed, and I told myself I would sort it out in the morning. I told myself that for another 6 weeks. That was my mistake, and it is the one that took me longest to forgive myself for. To understand what Scott and Denise were building, you have to understand what I built first. Ryan died in September. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by fall, 34 years old. There is no version of that sentence that softens with time, so I'll leave it exactly as it is. We had Avery in our first year of marriage, which was the best decision we ever made, and the hardest one to live through once Ryan got sick. She was 4 when he was diagnosed, 4.5 when he died, and she understood just enough to make it devastating in ways I am still learning to measure. The life insurance paid out the following spring, $240,000. I sat in the parking lot of the TD branch on Upper James Street with a deposit confirmation on my phone and cried for 20 minutes because it felt wrong to have money because of him, and it also felt like the only door out of a year that had nearly taken me apart alongside him. Part of it went to the down payment on the house, a small semi-detached on the east side of Hamilton, red brick, a cracked front walk, a kitchen that needed updating, 3 bedrooms if you counted the one barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser. Mortgage came out to just under $2,000 a month. On an RN salary with shift premiums and the Canada Child Benefit, I could manage it. Not easily. Not without knowing exactly where every dollar was going. But I could manage it, and I did. I want you to understand what that house meant. Ryan never saw it. I chose it myself, signed the papers myself, painted the second bedroom the shade of yellow Avery had pointed to in a magazine and declared perfect. I put her height chart on the kitchen door frame the week we moved in, a strip of paper tape with her name at the top, and told her we'd measure her every birthday so she could see how much she'd grown. She pressed her back against the wood and stood as tall as she possibly could, chin up, treating the occasion with the seriousness it deserved. I opened an RESC for her that same month, $25 a week into her education savings, automatic transfer. Not a lot. Everything I could spare. But it was mine to give her, and I gave it without hesitation. The house was ours, every corner of it. Scott called in November. He and Denise had been renting in Stony Creek, and he'd been laid off from the logistics company he'd worked at for 6 years when the division restructured. Without his income, they couldn't make rent. "Just until I find something," he said. "A couple of months, Leah. We won't be any trouble." I had one spare bedroom. I said they could have it. I had been holding on to the drive he'd made, 3 hours each way, to stand at Ryan's funeral. Families hold on to things like that. They run on the debt of the one decent act, and that drive was the one I'd been crediting him on ever since. So I opened the door, which is what I do. Denise arrived with 6 boxes of shoes. She said she didn't like to impose. The first few weeks were manageable, or I told myself they were. I was working my 3/12s, 2 days, 1 night, and Denise was home, and there was something useful about Avery not coming back to a silent house on the evenings I worked. She's a social child. She liked having someone to show things to. The first sign I read wrong was when Denise started taking Avery to her medical appointments without telling me. "You were on nights," she said when I found out. "I figured you'd be sleeping. It was just the dentist, Leah." I hadn't asked her to go. I hadn't been told. I'd moved my sleep around to make that appointment, and arrived to find Avery had already been seen. I said it was fine. I had been saying things were fine for longer than I could properly account for. The second sign was the pantry. I came home one afternoon to find everything reorganized. Avery's snack shelf moved. The labels all turned a different direction. A whole section cleared out for Denise's things. "It just flows better this way," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "You can change it back if you want." I didn't change it back. I couldn't have explained why at the time. Ryan's photograph migrated from the living room bookshelf to the hallway, to the corner of the mantel, and then one day it was in Avery's room. And when I asked, Denise said constant visual reminders could make grief complicated for small children. She said it the way she said most things, as though she'd read it somewhere authoritative and was only passing it along for my benefit. Avery began coming home from daycare quieter. Her teacher, Kezia, was young and watchful, the kind of person who notices which child is silent on which particular afternoon. She mentioned it at pickup. "She seems a little withdrawn sometimes." "Not every day. I just like to flag things." I said Avery was adjusting to having more people in the house. I believed that when I said it. My mother, when I described any of it on the phone, had explanations ready before I finished my sentences. "Grief moves in stages, sweetheart," she said, in the tone she used when she was being both kind and final at once. "And you know how your anxiety gets when you're running on short sleep. I just wonder if some of what you're reading as a problem is exhaustion." She wasn't wrong that I got anxious when I was tired. She also wasn't right that exhaustion was what this was. I stopped describing things to her after that conversation. Then came the night Avery pressed her face into my shoulder at bedtime and whispered something so quietly I almost missed it under the hum of her sound machine. "Auntie Denise says when Uncle Scott gets his new job, we might all move together. A bigger house, just us." I went very still. Just us meaning? Me and her and Uncle Scott. She looked up at me with those eyes she's had since she was born, the serious ones that see more than she says. "She says I'll have my own room with a window seat." I held her and told her that sounded like something grown-ups were imagining, not a real plan, and that she didn't need to worry about it. She nodded against my shoulder, the kind of nod that means I heard you, not the kind that means I believe you. That was when I stopped saying things were fine. The thing that finally showed me the full shape of it was the smallest device in the house. When Avery was 6 weeks old, I set up a Nanit monitor in her room, the kind that records audio and video and backs everything up automatically to an app on my phone the moment it detects motion. By the time she was 3, I'd mostly forgotten about it. When Ryan died and I went back to full shifts, I'd turned it on again. My neighbor Mira, a retired teacher who had known Ryan, who had brought us meals for 6 weeks after his diagnosis, could check the feed from her own phone on nights I was at the hospital, just so there was another adult eye on the house. It had become so routine I'd stopped thinking of it as a recording device. Denise certainly never thought of it at all. To her, it was an old piece of plastic mounted near the ceiling, beneath her notice. It was Mira who knocked on my door on a Saturday morning while Avery was out with Scott and Denise, at a birthday party I hadn't been invited to plan. She stood on my porch with her coat half-zipped, and the look of someone choosing their words carefully. "There's been a woman from a realty office here twice," she said. "Your sister-in-law showed her around both times. I thought you'd want to know." I thanked her. I went inside. I opened the Nanit app for the first time in months. The recordings went back weeks. I don't know how long I sat on the edge of my bed listening to them. Long enough for the winter light in the room to change entirely. 3 weeks earlier, Denise's voice, quiet and close to the monitor, clearly sitting on the edge of Avery's bed after I'd left for a shift. "Your daddy is in heaven and your mommy is always at the hospital. That's just how it is. But Auntie Denise is always here, isn't she?" 2 weeks earlier, "If you told mommy about our talks, she'd be very sad. She's still not very well, sweetheart. We don't want to make things harder for her." 10 days earlier, Avery's small, confused voice, "But mommy is my mommy." And Denise, gentle and unhurried, "Of course she is, sweetheart. But some mommies need help. Some families just rearrange. You'll understand when you're older." I played that last one 3 times. Each time it landed differently, and all 3 landings were bad. I went to Kezia before my next shift, and she was already reaching under the front desk before I finished explaining. She had a small notebook, dated entries, careful handwriting, things Avery had said specifically on the afternoons Denise picked her up. Sentences a 5-year-old does not generate on her own. "Auntie Denise is going to be my new mommy. Mommy doesn't know how to take care of the house." One line Kezia had underlined twice. "Mommy is sick and doesn't know it yet." "I almost called you twice," Kezia said. "Denise told me both times that you already knew, that you'd asked her to manage things while you were still recovering. I should have called anyway. I'm so sorry." "You couldn't have known what she was doing," I said. I meant it completely. The printed email, I found on a Tuesday, slid halfway under the edge of the printer. It was a response from a family lawyer in Ancaster. Scott had written in with questions, careful, 1-paragraph hypotheticals. The kind lawyers recognize immediately as someone gathering information without committing to a consultation about whether a couple could petition for guardianship of a child if the sole parent worked erratic overnight shifts in a high-stress medical environment and had a documented history of anxiety and grief-related mental health difficulties. I photographed it. I emailed it to myself. I put it back exactly where I'd found it, because I had learned something from the monitor recordings. The best thing I could do was let them believe no one was watching. I want to stop here and tell you the thing that finally made the whole shape of it clear to me. Denise had 2 miscarriages before they moved in. I knew this. Ryan and I had sent flowers the first time, and I'd sat with her on the phone for an hour the second time, crying a little myself because that kind of loss is real and it deserves witness. She had wanted children badly, and here was a little girl, almost exactly the age her first child would have been, living in a house that had lost its anchor, being raised by a mother who left in the dark 3 nights a week. She hadn't decided to take Avery out of cruelty. She'd decided out of a grief that had curdled into something she could no longer name clearly, and she'd brought Scott along because he had always, in all the years I had known them, gone where Denise pointed. Understanding that didn't change what needed to happen. But it changed how I stood when it did. In Ontario, you can record a phone call you're part of without telling the other person. I called Denise from the hospital car park before a day shift, and I let her talk. She talked for nearly 8 minutes. She talked about structure and consistency and what Avery needed. And then, near the end, she said the part she had been carefully not saying out loud for months. "She already looks to me first, Leah. I know that's hard to hear, but a child knows who's actually present." I saved that recording in 4 places. Avery's 6th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. My parents drove in from Brantford. Ryan's sister Tori came with their aunt. Scott and Denise had CC'd my mother on the cake order and arrived with balloons I hadn't asked for, and I let every single bit of it happen, because I had spent the past 3 weeks learning that the best strategy I had was patience that looked, from the outside, exactly like acceptance. Denise waited until after the cake. She had always been good at timing. She chose moments when rooms were warm and resistance was lowest. She tapped her wine glass, and the kitchen went quiet the way kitchens do when someone signals they're about to say something significant. "I just want to say something," she began, with the smile of someone delivering welcome news, "because I think it needs to be said in front of everyone who loves this little girl." She looked at Avery, then at my parents, then at Tori across the table. "Scott and I have been giving a lot of thought to what's best for Avery going forward, what kind of stability a growing child needs. We want to be more formal about our role in her life, because she deserves that kind of certainty." Scott was looking at the table. My mother's face was unreadable. Avery was eating the corner piece of her birthday cake and paying no attention to any of us, which was the only correct response to being 6 years old. I let Denise finish. Then I reached over to the kitchen counter and pressed play on my phone. Denise's voice came out of the speaker. The recording from Avery's bedroom, 10 days old. "Some families just rearrange. You'll understand when you're older." The room went completely still. Tori set her fork down. I let it play to the end. Then I looked around the table, unhurried, the way I had practiced doing in my own head for 2 weeks. "That is my daughter's baby monitor," I said. "I need everyone here to understand that this has been happening in her bedroom at night while I was at work taking care of other people's families." I played the phone recording next. Denise's voice, confident and certain. "She already looks to me first, Leah." Then I slid the photograph of the lawyer's email across the table to my father. He read it once, then again, slower. He didn't look up for a long time. I laid Kezia's notebook pages out after that. Dated entries, a teacher's careful handwriting, impossible to argue with. My father passed the photograph to my mother without a word. "I am not unwell," I said, and I kept my voice very quiet because quiet was louder now than anything else in the room could have been. "I am a registered nurse and a sole provider, and the person who bought this house and has made every mortgage payment and every daycare payment and has shown up for my daughter through the worst year of both our lives. And someone at this table spent months telling a 5-year-old that her mother doesn't know how to take care of her." Denise said it was out of context. She said I was twisting things. She looked at Scott, but Scott had both hands flat on the table and was staring at the surface and did not look back at her. My mother's hand found my arm. Tori, across the table, had gone very still. When she finally spoke, she addressed Denise directly, and her voice was the particular quiet that Ryan's family sometimes got when they were genuinely, carefully furious. "She lost her husband. She bought this house herself. And you were sitting on her daughter's bed at night." She didn't say anything further. She didn't need to. My father looked at Scott with an expression I had never seen on him before. "What did you think the end of this looked like?" he asked. It wasn't rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to know. Scott's mouth opened. He looked, in that moment, genuinely at a loss, like a man who had been following a route without ever asking where it ended. He had no answer for my father. I don't think he had ever been asked to account for the ending of the plan, only to execute the middle of it. Denise stood up, picked up her cardigan from the back of her chair, and walked out of the kitchen without another word. I heard the front door. I heard her in the driveway calling Scott's name once, sharply. He sat there for another 30 seconds. Then he got up and said to me, without quite meeting my eyes, "I'm sorry, Leah. I don't have any excuse for it." He walked out after her. The birthday party didn't end with shouting. It ended quietly, the way these things actually do. Tori helped Avery open the last of her presents. My father washed dishes without being asked. My mother sat beside me on the sofa for a long time without saying much, and at some point she took my hand, which was not everything I would eventually need from her, and was not nothing. Avery had another piece of cake. She was largely unbothered by adult proceedings, which is the correct response to being 6 years old. Scott and Denise moved out within 10 days. They found a furnished rental back in Stony Creek, and I held the door. There was no court case, no formal proceeding, no dramatic legal reckoning. Real consequences are quieter than that, and in some ways heavier. They lost the version of themselves they had been presenting to everyone who knew them. The devoted, steady aunt and uncle. The ones who were only trying to help. Once people heard those recordings, that version could not be reassembled. You cannot rebuild a reputation from ruins that people witnessed being made. Scott called 3 weeks later. He said he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. He said Denise had been driving the plan from the beginning, and he hadn't known how to tell her no, and that he understood that wasn't an excuse, only an explanation. I told him I needed time. He said that was fair. He also told me, quietly, that Denise had lost a third pregnancy the year before Ryan got sick, one no one outside their marriage had known about. He said she had never recovered from it, and he had not known how to help her through it. I am genuinely sorry for that loss. I hold it separately from everything else, because a real grief deserves to be held separately from what someone decides to do with it. I changed the locks, new hardware, my choosing, one key cut for Mira and no one else. I updated the daycare pickup list in person, standing at Kezia's desk and making sure every name was exactly right. Kezia hugged me on my way out. I held it together until I got to the car, where I did the crying that I always save for places where no one has to make it comfortable. Avery started seeing a play therapist at a clinic on King Street. A gentle woman with a room full of sand trays and small painted figurines who made every session feel like a good afternoon. The bedwetting stopped within the first month. The clinging at daycare drop-off eased the month after. She stopped asking whether we were going to move somewhere else. I noticed one morning that the question had simply been gone for weeks without my ever registering when it left. My mother and I talk on the phone every Sunday now. It is careful, and it is real, and she has never used the exact words, "I should have listened to you." But she shows us it's differently. She asks about Avery by name. She asks what I need instead of telling me what I have. She asks follow-up questions to things I said 3 weeks earlier. We are building something new on a foundation that cracked, and the building is slow, and it is honest, and for right now that is enough. I have not spoken to Denise. I don't expect to. Last Tuesday, I came home from a day shift to find Avery in the kitchen with a wooden spoon and a bowl that contained something with approximately the right ingredients for pancake batter in approximately the wrong proportions, covering approximately the entire counter. "I'm making dinner," she told me, very seriously. "I can see that," I said. She pointed the spoon at the kitchen doorframe. "Can we measure me?" I think I grew. We measured her. 1.5 centimeters since her birthday, which she found entirely satisfying. She held her arm up to show me the new pencil mark, standing as tall and official as she'd stood on the very first day, when she was 4.5, and the house was still new, and the world had not yet asked either of us to be harder than we wanted to be. "Is this still our house?" she asked. Not worried, just checking, the way she checks everything. I pressed my hand flat to the doorframe, over all the little marks that record every year she has been alive, and every year she has grown. "Every inch," I said, "and it always will be." She nodded once, already turning her full attention back to the more urgent matter of the pancake batter, and I stood in the kitchen I had chosen for us, and understood that I was, at 32, finally finished with the particular kind of kindness that asks you to make yourself smaller so that other people never have to feel uncomfortable about what they've taken. The door is mine. I decide who comes through it. And for the first time in a very long time, that is the only thing I need it to be.